The bright lights of Street Mary's Hospital cut through the early morning darkness as Sarah Chen pushed open the heavy glass doors. Her small hands trembled as she held a tiny bundle wrapped in a pale blue blanket close to her chest. The 12-year-old girl's school uniform was wrinkled, and her long black hair was messy from the winter wind. Dark circles under her eyes showed she hadn't slept all night. The emergency room was quiet at 5:30 a.m., with only a few patients waiting. The silence broke when Nurse Jenny Thompson looked up from her desk and saw the young girl standing there, holding what was clearly a newborn baby. The nurse's eyes widened in shock, and she quickly rushed from behind the counter. "Oh my goodness, sweetie, what's going on?" Nurse Jenny asked, her voice filled with concern. She noticed how Sarah's school shoes were covered in mud, and her uniform jacket was buttoned wrong, as if she had dressed in a hurry. Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she carefully pulled back the blanket to show the baby's face. The infant was tiny but looked healthy, with rosy cheeks and a button nose. The baby was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the strange situation. "Please help the baby," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "I walked for 2 hours to get here. I didn't know where else to go." Nurse Jenny quickly called for help, and within seconds, more hospital staff appeared. Dr. James Wilson, a kind-looking man with gray hair, came running from the emergency room. A young social worker named Elena Martinez arrived shortly after, her face full of worry when she saw how young Sarah was. The hospital staff tried to take the baby, but Sarah wouldn't let go at first. Her small fingers gripped the blanket tightly until Dr. Wilson gently explained they needed to check if the baby was healthy. Only then did she slowly hand over the infant, her eyes never leaving the small bundle. "The baby girl was born 6 hours ago," Sarah told them quietly. "I cleaned her with warm water and wrapped her in my softest blanket. I helped deliver her." The medical team was shocked. They had many questions, but Sarah wouldn't say anything more about where the baby came from or who the mother was. She just stood there, her school backpack still on her shoulders, watching as they examined the newborn. Alina, the social worker, brought Sarah some hot chocolate and a warm blanket. She noticed how the young girl's hands were scratched and dirty, and there were leaves in her hair. It was clear she had been somewhere rough before coming to the hospital. "Sarah, sweetheart, we need to call your parents," Alina said softly. "They must be very worried about you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "My parents are at work. They don't know I'm here. They don't know anything." The hospital security team checked their cameras and saw Sarah walking up to the hospital alone in the dark. She had carried the baby carefully, stopping every few minutes to check on the infant and fix the blanket. The footage showed no one else around her. Dr. Wilson finished examining the baby and came to talk to them. "The baby is perfectly healthy," he said with a smile. "Someone took very good care of her after she was born. Sarah, you might have saved this little one's life by bringing her here." Sarah finally relaxed a little when she heard this news. Her shoulders dropped, and she let out a long breath, as if she had been holding it since she arrived. But there was still worry in her eyes, and she kept looking at the hospital doors, as if expecting someone to come through them. The police were called, and a female officer named Patricia Lee arrived to ask questions. But Sarah stayed quiet, only speaking to ask if she could see the baby again. She sat next to the small hospital crib where the infant now lay, watching the tiny chest rise and fall with each breath. No one knew it yet, but this was just the beginning of a story that would shock their entire city. The small girl in the muddy school uniform had set in motion a chain of events that would uncover secrets bigger than anyone could imagine. And it all started on this cold winter morning, when a brave 12-year-old girl walked through those hospital doors with a newborn baby in her arms. The morning sun was starting to shine through the hospital windows as Elena Martinez, the social worker, sat with Sarah in a small private room. The walls were painted in soft yellow, with colorful pictures of animals trying to make the room less scary for young patients. But Sarah wasn't looking at the pictures. Her eyes kept moving to the door, where she could see nurses walking back and forth with the baby. "Sarah, we need to understand what happened," Elena said gently. She placed a sandwich and apple juice in front of the tired girl. "You're not in trouble, but we need to know where the baby came from. Is she your sister?" Sarah shook her head. She picked up the juice box but didn't drink it. Her school uniform was still dirty, and Elena noticed a small tear in her jacket sleeve that looked fresh. The girl's phone was in her backpack, but it was turned off. She refused to turn it on when Elena asked. Officer Patricia Lee joined them, sitting down slowly so she wouldn't frighten Sarah. The baby's umbilical cord was cut carefully, the police officer said. Someone who knew what they were doing helped with the birth. Was it a doctor, Sarah? Or a nurse? For the first time since arriving, Sarah spoke more than a few words. I watched videos on my phone, she said quietly, about helping with birth. I studied them for weeks. I was so scared I would do something wrong. Alina and Officer Lee looked at each other in surprise. This young girl had actually helped deliver the baby herself. But before they could ask more questions, there was a commotion in the hallway. "Where is she? Where's my daughter?" A woman's panicked voice called out. Sarah's parents had finally arrived. Her mother, Mrs. Chen, rushed into the room wearing an office suit, her high heels clicking on the floor. Mr. Chen followed close behind, still holding his car keys and looking confused. "Sarah, we got calls from the hospital and the police. Why aren't you in school? What's going on?" Mrs. Chen's voice was shaking as she hugged her daughter. She looked at the social worker and police officer with fear in her eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen," Officer Lee began, "your daughter brought a newborn baby to the hospital early this morning. She's been here since 5:30 a.m. Sarah's parents looked shocked. Her father sat down heavily in a chair, his face pale. "A baby? But that's impossible. Sarah was in her room when we left for work at 5 a.m. We checked on her before leaving." "No, you didn't," Sarah said softly, looking at her hands. "You haven't checked on me in the morning for months. You both leave for work before I wake up." The room went quiet. Mrs. Chen's face turned red with shame, and Mr. Chen looked down at the floor. They knew their daughter was telling the truth. Dr. Wilson came into the room then, holding some papers. "The baby is about 6 hours old now," he explained. "She's perfectly healthy, weighing 6 pounds and 4 ounces. Someone gave her excellent care right after birth." He looked at Sarah with respect in his eyes. "But where did the baby come from?" Mrs. Chen asked, her voice rising. "Sarah, you need to tell us right now." Sarah started crying silently, tears rolling down her cheeks. Alina moved closer to comfort her, but the girl wiped her eyes and spoke clearly. "I can't tell you yet. I made a promise. But the baby is safe now, and that's what matters." Officer Lee pulled out her phone and showed everyone a map. "Sarah's shoes have mud from the Riverside area. There's an old factory district there. We're sending officers to search it now." Sarah's face changed when she saw the map. For just a second, she looked scared. Elena noticed this and made a note in her notebook. The social worker had worked with many children before, and she could tell Sarah wasn't lying about anything. She was keeping a secret to protect someone. The morning turned into afternoon, and still, Sarah wouldn't say more. The baby was moved to the nursery, where nurses took turns caring for her. Every hour, Sarah asked to see the infant, checking that she was still there, still safe. Whatever secret this 12-year-old girl was keeping, it was clear that protecting this baby was the most important thing in her world right now. Late afternoon sunlight filled the hospital room as Elena sat with Sarah again. The social worker had sent Sarah's parents to fill out paperwork, hoping the girl might open up more without them present. On the small table between them, Elena placed Sarah's school backpack, which the police had just finished checking. "Sarah," Elena said softly, "we found something interesting in your backpack." She carefully pulled out a small notebook with a purple cover. "These are notes about pregnancy and baby care. You've been preparing for this for months, haven't you?" Sarah looked at the notebook but didn't reach for it. Her eyes were tired, but she sat up straighter in her chair. "I had to learn everything," she whispered. "I couldn't make any mistakes. The baby needed me to do things right." Elena opened the notebook. Inside were careful notes written in different colored pens. There were lists of baby supplies, instructions for handling emergencies, and even drawings of how to wrap a newborn properly. Some pages had food stains and watermarks, showing Sarah had carried this notebook everywhere. The police also found something else. Elena continued gently. She placed a small plastic bag on the table. Inside were several grocery store receipts for baby supplies, dated over the past 3 months. "You've been buying baby things with your lunch money, haven't you?" Tears formed in Sarah's eyes, but this time she didn't wipe them away. "And my birthday money," she admitted. "And the money from helping neighbors with their gardens. But it wasn't enough. Sometimes I had to take things from stores." Her voice shook with shame. Alina reached out and held Sarah's hand. You were trying to help someone. Who was it, Sarah? Who needed these supplies? For a long moment, the room was quiet except for the distant sounds of hospital activity. Then Sarah took a deep breath. Her name is Maria, she finally said. She's 16. I found her living in the old factory by the river 3 months ago. As Sarah spoke, Alina quickly sent a text message to Officer Lee. They finally had a name. I was taking a shortcut home from school, Sarah continued, her words coming faster now. I heard crying from the factory building. I thought maybe it was a hurt animal, but it was Maria. She was hungry and scared. Her feet were bleeding from walking so far. Alina nodded encouragingly, not wanting to interrupt now that Sarah was finally talking. She was already pregnant. 6 months pregnant, Sarah said. She begged me not to tell anyone. She said bad people were looking for her. She was so scared, Alina. She cried every time I had to leave. Sarah's hands twisted in her lap as she remembered. I promised I would help her. I promised I wouldn't tell anyone where she was. Just then, Officer Lee appeared in the doorway. She had been listening and quickly wrote down everything in her notebook. Sarah, the officer said kindly, did Maria tell you who the bad people were? Sarah shook her head. She didn't like talking about them, but sometimes she had nightmares and talked in her sleep. She mentioned a man named Jack and a woman called Rose. She said they would hurt her baby if they found her. Alina and Officer Lee exchanged worried looks. These names matched ones from a recent human trafficking case they'd been following. Sarah, Alina said carefully, you did the right thing helping Maria. But where is she now? We need to find her to keep her safe. Fresh tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks. She was gone when I went back this morning. After the baby was born, she told me to take the baby to the hospital. She said she had to lead the bad people away so they wouldn't find her baby. She left this note. Sarah reached into her sock and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The note was written in shaky handwriting on a torn piece of notebook paper. As Alina read it, she understood why Sarah had been so protective of the baby. Maria's words were simple but heartbreaking. Take care of my baby. Keep her safe. I'll come back when I know they can't find us. Thank you for being my angel, Sarah. The police station was busy when Officer Lee brought Sarah and her parents there that evening. They needed Sarah to tell them exactly what happened the night before when the baby was born. Sarah sat in a special room with bright pictures on the walls, made for talking to children. Her parents waited outside, still trying to understand how their daughter had kept such a big secret. Can you tell us about last night? Officer Lee asked, while Alina sat nearby for support. A police camera recorded everything, but they tried to make Sarah feel comfortable. Sarah hugged herself, remembering. I was doing my homework when I got the text from Maria. She used the cheap phone I bought her from the corner store. She said the baby was coming. In Sarah's memory, everything from the night before became clear again. She remembered climbing out of her window at 10 p.m. after her parents were asleep. The night was cold, and she carried her school backpack filled with clean towels and the supplies she had been saving. When I got to the factory, Maria was already in pain, Sarah continued. I had watched so many videos about helping with birth. I kept my phone's medical websites open to check everything. Maria was so brave, she tried not to scream because she was afraid someone would hear. Officer Lee nodded gently. You helped deliver the baby all by yourself? Yes, Sarah's voice got stronger. The baby came at exactly 11:42 p.m. I know because I wrote it down. She cried right away, and Maria cried too, with happy tears this time. I cleaned the baby just like I learned from the videos. I checked her fingers and toes, and made sure she was breathing well. Alina smiled encouragingly. You did an amazing job, Sarah. The doctors said you took perfect care of the baby. Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. Everything was okay for a few hours. Maria fed the baby, and they both slept a little. But then, she stopped, her hands shaking. Then what happened? Officer Lee asked softly. Maria heard something outside at about 4 a.m. She looked so scared. She said they had found her. Sarah's voice trembled. She told me to take the baby to the hospital. She said she would lead them away, make them follow her so they wouldn't find the baby. I didn't want to leave her, but she made me promise. Officer Lee showed Sarah some pictures on her tablet. Did you ever see any of these people around the factory? Sarah looked carefully at each photo. She pointed to two of them. This man and woman drove past the factory once. Maria saw them and hid behind some boxes. She was shaking so hard she couldn't speak for an hour. The officers outside the room started moving quickly when they heard this. These were known human traffickers they had been trying to catch for months. Sarah, Alina said, "Did Maria tell you where she came from, or where she might go?" "She talked about mountains sometimes," Sarah remembered. "She said her real home was in a place with big mountains and snow. And she liked to look at pictures of Seattle on my phone. She said it looked safe there." Just then, Sarah's father knocked on the door. When Alana opened it, he looked worried. "There's something you need to see," he said. We checked Sarah's computer at home. She's been searching for bus schedules to Seattle for the past week. Officer Lee quickly called more officers. "We need to check all buses heading to Seattle," she ordered. "The girl might be trying to go there." Sarah suddenly stood up. "The baby," she said urgently. "We need to go back to the hospital. Maria might try to find her there." The adults looked at each other. Sarah was right. If Maria came back for her baby, the hospital would be the first place she'd go. They needed to protect both Maria and the baby from the dangerous people looking for them. As they rushed back to the hospital, Sarah held Alina's hand tightly. "Maria called me her guardian angel," she whispered. "But now she needs more angels. She needs the police to find her before the bad people do." Officer Lee made a promise to herself as she drove them through the darkening evening. They would find Maria. This brave 12-year-old girl had done her part. Now it was time for the police to do theirs. Back at the hospital, extra security guards were posted at every entrance. The baby girl had been moved to a special secure room in the pediatric wing, with a police officer stationed outside the door. Sarah sat with her parents in a nearby waiting room, watching people walk past in the hallway. Every time someone walked by, she looked up hopefully, thinking it might be Maria. Mrs. Chen held her daughter's hand, trying to understand everything she had learned about Sarah's secret life. "Why didn't you tell us about Maria?" she asked softly. "We could have helped." Sarah looked down at her shoes, which were still muddy from the night before. "You and Dad are always so busy," she said quietly. "You leave before I wake up and come home after I'm in bed. Sometimes I don't see you for days." Mr. Chen stopped pacing the room and sat down heavily in a chair. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he said, his voice filled with regret. "Working hard to give you a good life. But we weren't really giving you a life at all, were we?" Before Sarah could answer, Alina came into the room with some news. "The police found something at the factory," she said. There was a hidden room behind some old boxes. They found blankets, food wrappers, and, she paused, looking at Sarah, drawings. Lots of drawings. Sarah's eyes lit up. "Maria loves to draw. She was always drawing in the notebook I gave her. She's really good at it." The social worker pulled out her phone and showed them some photos. The drawings were beautiful. Pictures of mountains, forests, and a small house with smoke coming from the chimney. But there was something else in the pictures that caught everyone's attention. "Look at the license plate numbers in these drawings," Alina pointed out. "Maria drew several cars with the same plate numbers over and over. The police are checking them now." Suddenly, there was a commotion in the hallway. Officer Lee rushed into the room, looking excited. "We found one of the cars," she announced. "It was parked at a bus station 2 towns over. And there's more. A girl matching Maria's description bought a ticket 3 hours ago." Sarah jumped up. Where was she going? Was she okay? "The ticket was for Portland, not Seattle," Officer Lee explained. "But we think that might be just to trick the people following her. There's a bus from Portland to Seattle later tonight." Mr. Chen stood up, looking determined. "I have a friend who runs a shelter for teenagers in Seattle," he said. "I'll call him right now. If Maria makes it there, we can make sure she has a safe place to go." For the first time since everything started, Sarah smiled. Her father was finally trying to help. Mrs. Chen hugged her daughter and whispered, "I'm so sorry we weren't there for you, Sarah, but we're here now, and we'll help Maria together." Just then, Dr. Wilson came to the door. "The baby needs to eat," he said kindly. "Sarah, since you've been taking care of her, would you like to help the nurses feed her?" Sarah looked at her parents, who nodded encouragingly. As she followed Dr. Wilson to the baby's room, she felt different. She wasn't carrying the weight of her secret alone anymore. In the secure room, the baby was awake, making small cooing sounds. A nurse showed Sarah how to hold the bottle properly, and soon the tiny girl was drinking happily. As Sarah watched the baby eat, she whispered very quietly, "Your mom is so brave, little one, and she loves you so much. We're going to find her, I promise." Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in beautiful colors. Somewhere out there, Maria was on a bus, trying to find her way to safety. But now she had more than just one guardian angel looking out for her. She had the police, Sarah's family, and soon, a whole network of people ready to help keep her and her baby safe. Night had fallen over the city when Officer Lee received an urgent call. The police in Portland had spotted someone who looked like Maria getting off a bus, but by the time they got to the station, she was gone. What they did find, though, was something very important: Maria's backpack, left behind on purpose in the station's bathroom. Officer Lee brought the backpack to the hospital to show Sarah. "We think she left this for us to find," the officer explained, carefully opening the bag on a table. Inside were more drawings, but these were different from the ones at the factory. These drawings told a story. Sarah leaned forward, looking at each picture carefully. "These are new," she said. "Maria drew these recently. Look, this one shows the factory, and that's me, helping with the baby." Her voice trembled a little as she pointed to the figures in the drawing. Elena picked up another drawing that showed a large house with many windows. Written at the bottom in small letters were the words, "They kept us here." Officer Lee quickly took a photo and sent it to her team. This could be the evidence they needed to find the trafficker's location. "There's something else," Officer Lee said, pulling out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter, written in Maria's neat handwriting. She handed it to Sarah to read first. Sarah's hands shook as she read the letter out loud. "Dear Sarah, my brave angel. Thank you for saving my baby and me. I'm leaving these drawings for the police. They show the house where bad people keep other girls like me. I remember every detail because I promised myself I would never forget. Please help them find the other girls. They are scared and alone, just like I was before I met you." The adults in the room looked at each other with growing excitement. This could help them solve a trafficking case they'd been working on for months. But Sarah was still reading the letter, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I'm going somewhere safe," she continued reading. "Someone at the bus station recognized me from when I first escaped. She's part of a secret network that helps girls like me. They're taking me to a safe house where the bad people can't find me. Please take care of my baby until I can come back. Tell her every day that her mama loves her more than anything in the world." Mr. Chen, who had been making calls to his contacts in Seattle, put down his phone. "The shelter network in Seattle knows about Maria now," he said. "They'll help her if she makes it there." Just then, Sarah's mother noticed something else in the backpack. It was a small, handmade baby blanket. "Look at this," she said softly, pulling it out. The blanket was made from pieces of old t-shirts, carefully sewn together. In one corner, Maria had stitched the words, "For my little star." Dr. Wilson came into the room with news about the baby. "She's doing wonderfully," he said with a smile, "but she needs a name for the hospital records." "Did Maria ever tell you what name she wanted for her baby?" Sarah nodded, remembering something. She pulled out her phone and showed them a note Maria had written weeks ago. She wanted to name her Luna, Sarah said, because the moon was the only light she could see from the factory windows at night. She said the moon made her feel less alone. Officer Lee's phone suddenly buzzed with an urgent message. The police had matched the house from Maria's drawing to a property just outside the city. Teams were already on their way there. The officer quickly got up to leave, but before she did, she turned to Sarah. "You and Maria," she said seriously, "you've done something amazing. These drawings might help us save many other girls. Sometimes the bravest things are done by the youngest people." As the officer left, Sarah walked to the window and looked up at the night sky. The moon was full and bright, just like on the nights when she had sat with Maria in the factory, planning and hoping for a better future. Somewhere out there, Maria was looking at the same moon, finally on her way to safety. The next morning brought big news. The police raid on the house from Maria's drawing had been successful. Officer Lee came to the hospital early to tell Sarah and her family what happened. They sat in the now familiar waiting room as she explained everything. "We found 7 girls in that house," Officer Lee said quietly. "All of them teenagers, all of them far from home. They're safe now, and the bad people who kept them there are under arrest." She smiled at Sarah. And it's all because of Maria's drawings and your bravery. Sarah hugged the baby blanket Maria had made, which she'd been carrying around since they found it. Did any of the girls know Maria? She asked hopefully. Officer Lee nodded. Yes, they did. They told us Maria was the only one who ever managed to escape. She spent weeks learning the guard schedule and planning her way out. They said she promised to send help once she was free, but they were afraid to believe her. The officer's eyes were wet with tears. She kept her promise to them, just like she kept her promise to you. Elena came into the room with more news. The baby, Luna, is being released from the hospital today, she explained. But we need to talk about what happens next. Sarah sat up straighter, worried. What do you mean? Where will she go? Elena sat down next to Sarah. There's a wonderful foster family who specializes in caring for babies. They'll take care of Luna until Maria is found and can prove she's in a safe, stable situation. No, Sarah said firmly, surprising everyone. Luna should stay with us. Maria trusts me. She knows I'll take care of her baby. She turned to her parents with pleading eyes. Mrs. Chen reached for her husband's hand. They had been talking about this all night. We've already spoken to Alana and the social services team, she said. Your father and I have applied to be temporary foster parents for Luna. If they approve us, she can stay with our family. Sarah's face lit up with joy, but her mother wasn't finished speaking. We've made other changes too, Mrs. Chen continued. I talked to my boss about working from home 3 days a week. Your father is hiring someone to help manage his store till he can be home more often. She wiped tears from her eyes. We'll never let you feel alone again, Sarah. Just then, Dr. Wilson hurried into the room. You need to see this, he said, turning on the small TV in the corner. It was the morning news, and they were showing pictures of the rescued girls being taken to safety. But what caught everyone's attention was a small detail in the background of one shot. Look, Sarah pointed at the screen. That poster on the wall. The camera had briefly shown a missing persons poster. It was old and faded, but the picture was clear. A school photo of a smiling Maria, taken before she was taken by the traffickers. Under the picture was her full name, Maria Isabella Torres, and her hometown, Boulder, Colorado. Officer Lee was already on her phone, calling the police department in Boulder. Within minutes, they had amazing news. Maria's family had been searching for her for 8 months. They'd never given up hope. Her parents are flying here right now, Officer Lee announced. They'll land in 3 hours. Sarah's hands were shaking with excitement. But where's Maria? We need to find her before. She was interrupted by Elena's phone ringing. The social worker answered it, listened for a moment, then broke into a huge smile. That was the shelter in Seattle, she said. Maria is there. She's safe. They're going to drive her back here to meet her parents. Happy tears ran down Sarah's face as she hugged her mother. After all the fear and secrecy, after all the hard work and worry, everything was finally working out. Maria would be reunited with her family, and soon she would hold her baby girl again. Outside the window, the morning sun shone brightly. Just like Sarah had promised herself during those long nights helping Maria, the darkness was over. A new day had come, bringing hope and healing with it. 2 days later, the hospital waiting room was filled with happy tears as Maria reunited with her parents. Sarah watched from the doorway as the 16-year-old fell into her mother's arms, both of them crying and hugging each other tightly. Maria's father wrapped his arms around them both, his shoulders shaking with emotion. Maria looked different now. The shelter in Seattle had given her new clothes, and her long dark hair was clean and neatly brushed. But her eyes were the same, kind and gentle, just as Sarah remembered. When Maria saw Sarah standing there, she reached out one hand. My guardian angel, Maria said softly. Come here. Sarah ran to her, and Maria hugged her tightly. Thank you for saving my baby, Maria whispered. Thank you for keeping your promises. Luna is ready to see you, Elena said, appearing in the doorway. She's in the nursery whenever you're ready. Maria's parents went with her to meet their granddaughter for the first time. Sarah and her family followed behind, watching as Maria approached the crib where Luna lay awake, making small cooing sounds. When Maria picked up her baby girl, everyone in the room could feel the love between mother and child. Hello, my little star, Maria said, kissing Luna's forehead. Mama's here now. I'm never leaving you again. Officer Lee came to visit later that day, bringing good news. All the people from the trafficking ring have been arrested, she announced. And because of Maria's drawings and testimony, they'll go to prison for a very long time. The other girls are being reunited with their families too. Maria's father, Mr. Torres, had more news to share. We're moving to Seattle, he said. There's a special program there for young mothers like Maria. She can finish high school while living with us, and there's daycare for Luna. He looked at Sarah's family gratefully. You'll always be part of our family now. You can visit us anytime. Sarah's parents had changed too. Their house was different now. Mrs. Chen had turned the guest room into a home office so she could work from home more often. Mr. Chen had posted his store's new hours, closing early 3 days a week to spend time with his family. They had even started eating dinner together every night, something they hadn't done in years. 1 month later, on the day before Maria and Luna were leaving for Seattle, both families gathered in Sarah's backyard for a goodbye party. Luna, growing bigger and stronger every day, wore the blanket her mother had made her. Maria showed everyone her acceptance letter to a special high school program for teen mothers. I'm going to study art therapy, Maria told them. I want to help other girls who've been through hard times. Art helped me stay strong, and maybe it can help them too. Sarah had a surprise for Maria. She handed her a thick envelope full of letters. These are from the other girls you helped save, she explained. They all wanted to thank you for being so brave and helping the police find them. As the sun began to set, Maria hugged Sarah one last time. You taught me something important, she said. Sometimes the biggest heroes come in the smallest packages. You weren't afraid to help a stranger, even when it was hard and scary. You showed me what real courage looks like. Sarah smiled, thinking about how much had changed since that cold morning when she carried a newborn baby through the hospital doors. She wasn't just a regular 12-year-old girl anymore. She was someone who had made a difference in the world. That night, as Sarah got ready for bed, she looked out her window at the moon shining brightly in the sky. Somewhere in Seattle, Maria and Luna would be seeing the same moon. They weren't lost or alone anymore. They were safe, loved, and looking forward to their new life. And Sarah? She had learned that even the smallest person could make the biggest difference in someone's life. All it took was an open heart and the courage to help when someone needed it most.